Hello, all, and welcome back to a new episode of TV and Us, a conversation show about the TV series we just can't stop talking about. My name is Jennifer Hahn.
And I'm Sarah Callan.
And each season we focus on a different show, reviewing it episode by episode, and we invite you to watch along with us. Right now, we are reviewing Severance Season 2, and today we are on Episode 5, The Halfway Point. This episode is titled Trojan's Horse. Okay, Sarah, do you want to kick us off with a summary of Episode 5?
Sure. Tensions emerge after the team suffers a loss.
Oh.
That's it. That is the whole summary.
Oh, wow. Someone is having a really fun time writing these episode summaries. You know what I mean?
And they're nailing it. This is literally perfect.
Someone's having a field day being like, jokes on everybody. Let's give the vaguest summaries ever. Okay. Well, perfect. Well, let's dive in with our episode titles for Episode 5. Sarah, what is yours?
My title for this episode is True Grievances.
Oh, nice. Nice. Okay. True grievance. There's a lot of grievances to air. Everybody has so many to air.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. My episode title is Mournful Signage.
Oh, yes. That was another one on my list. It's so good.
Oh, it's so great. Oh, I cracked up. Milchek is on one in this episode, and I loved every bit of it. He has so many good one-liner zingers. Oh, I think I tried to write as many of them down, but it's really fun.
Mm-hmm. Me too. I was like, Sarah, you have to stop taking notes. You just have to watch the episode. But I just wanted to write down everything that Milchek said because it was all so good.
Yeah, there was a lot of really great lines in this episode and some really big, heavy-hitting moments. So we're going to dive into all of those. But before that, let's start off with our high-level thoughts about Episode 5 before we really dive in, because with Severance, so much happens in an episode. So at a high level, how did you receive this episode?
Yeah, this is, just another episode where we get a whole bunch more questions about what's going on. But like we were just saying, this is such a great Milchek episode. And I know that he is working for the evil corporation, but I really like Milchek. And in this episode, he's really stuck between a rock and a hard place here. And he is not having a good time in this episode. And Tramell Tillman does a fantastic job in this episode, as per usual. So that was just a joy to see. And we get to learn a little bit more about the workings of Lumen. We get to see a little bit more about what's going on with Mark and Devin and Rickon. And, we just kind of get a pulse on how everybody's feeling, and spoiler, no one's feeling great, and just creating a lot of tension in this episode. And after such an explosive episode 4, this just felt like such a natural way to continue that story and see how everybody's reacting and set up the second half of the season.
Yeah, and you bring up a really great point, which is I really love that this episode allows enough time to breathe and feel the aftermaths of everything that happened in the explosive 4th episode. I think that there's so many ripple effects that we get to see in this episode. And I appreciate that the show is choosing to allow us to have time to see all of the emotional reverberations that are happening as a result of the big moments in episode 4. Both from the perspective of the Ennies and how, Mark and Helly and Dylan are reacting to everything, but also the implications for Milchek as well, and his performance review and what that means for his stance and how he will seemingly clearly shift his approach in the second half of the season to maybe be a lot more cold, a lot more keeping the leash real tight, I think he says. So I think that is going to be interesting. There seems to be a decided shift that happens for everybody and I think what's also fun is that we see that the unity between the Ennies is also starting to break down a little bit. And so it's a great low point, the halfway mark in the show for us to see where we will go next. So, there's a lot of doubt, there's a lot of mistrust that's being sown into our team here that we're rooting for. And how will they navigate that? Will they conquer it, or will they let it overtake them and let Lumen win? Is kind of a whole open question for our next 5 episodes.
And it's kind of fascinating to see how that mistrust between the team has kind of festered.
Yeah.
We thought that some of that was being sown intentionally by Milchek with Dylan versus the rest of the severed team, but he could not have called that everything would go down with Helena the way that it did in the previous episode. And so that has just set everything over the top, and everyone's even more on edge than I think Milchek even had planned for. Like everything, he was sowing these seeds of mistrust within the group, and they have become something entirely different than he expected them to. And I also find that really fascinating that we ended up in the place that maybe was where he wanted to get eventually, but we got there probably way too quick, lost a worker. Now everybody is in a worse place, even though that mistrust and that lack of cohesion as a team was probably a goal of his. So that's going to be really interesting to see in the next few episodes how that continues to go, and the decisions that the severed workers make and the decisions that Milchek makes based on their very different interests.
Yeah, and what's also interesting about that is that, our original understanding is that we want to keep this team apart. But it also is neat to see the way that that goal has shifted for Lumen as well. I don't know how much like Dylan's role is as significant, but they clearly have such an intention to have Helly and Mark feel really connected to each other so that Mark will stay and be invested in completing his Cold Harbor file. And so even the way that Lumen's goals have shifted in what they want to cultivate in this team for their own self-interest is a little bit different from a lot of season 1 and maybe the first part of season 2 here, where we don't want this macro data refinement uprising to happen again. So let's keep them separate. But now it's kind of like, wait, but we want to send Helly in there, and she's important in feeling connected to Mark so that Mark will stay at work and be happy and finish his little file that is apparently going to be groundbreaking in history.
Yes. Okay, we are on the edge of our seats. What is this groundbreaking thing that he's doing with scary numbers? Will we ever find out is the question.
No. I don't hold on to hope anymore.
Honestly.
Let's include a spoiler alert here because there's some fun things to talk about related to that. So if you haven't seen Severance episode 5, we're diving right in. And if you know Severance, you know you need to go into this show every episode fully white canvas. Let it paint and let it lead you. So let's dive in. So one of the moments that I thought was really interesting is the way that Drummond talks about Cold Harbor with Milchek during his performance review. And he says, quote, "This will be one of the greatest moments in the history of this planet." And I thought that was so interesting and so fun because on one hand, it makes me really far more intrigued in what Cold Harbor is and what Lumen is doing. I think that's always been an open question and a source of dramatic tension for the show, but it very much is so now because they clearly believe and are putting a lot of eggs into this basket. But then the other part of me is like, a lot of corporate organizations will like make you feel like you're working on the most important thing ever as a way to drive motivation and drive investment and feel like there's a personal sense of mission in working on something big and important. So it was like, there's probably maybe a lot of hyperbole too. And this is part of the corporate machine as well. So that kind of two dimensions of that statement could both be true and has caused a lot of intrigue for me.
Yeah, absolutely. Because we don't know a lot about Lumen, but we do know a couple of things. One of them is that they are very wide reaching and have their fingers in a lot of different things that make this society, work. And then the other thing that we know about them is that they lie a lot. And so I feel like because of that mix of like what Lumen is and the few things that we know about them, either interpretation of that line could be true. It could be the greatest thing in human history. Or it could be Drummond just lying because that's what they do. And that's the beauty of it. We don't know because both are entirely plausible because of what we know about Lumen.
Yeah. Yeah. It could be either. And we have no idea because Lumen is like all smoke and mirrors to us at this point. So it could, they could be that they're working on something really significant, but also maybe not. I don't know. And will we ever find out is the other question. Is it all just for show? I still love,
Mm-hmm.
I still love the idea that Lumen is basically like a nothing company and they're all just there to just like the numbers mean nothing, all that kind of stuff. Because I think that would be just a fascinating like meta point around like the feeling of meaning that we ascribe to our jobs, but then also like when we really step back and think about it, like what is it all for too? But I don't think that's the direction they're going in. They seem to be teeing this up to be like there is something really sinister and significant happening at Lumen.
And they really focus on that in this episode, like a lot more than I think we've ever heard in this show. There's a couple of times when they talk about like the importance of this team and the importance of Cold Harbor and staying connected to the mission and all of this, like especially in when Drummond is talking, he talks a lot about that larger, mysterious but glorious mission that Lumen is
Yeah.
working to achieve or whatever. And I thought that that was really notable because we haven't heard language like that so far in the show, I don't think. And that's interesting that we've, gone from seeing things primarily from either the innies or the outies perspective, and now we're seeing a little bit more from upper leadership, not just Milchick, but the levels above him as well. So we're able to get more of that kind of corporatese language and all of that stuff that can be a little almost like culty when you get into it. And
Yeah.
I appreciate that a lot of that was kind of steadily infused in this episode because we have been asking those questions about what is the mission? Why is Mark so important? What is Cold Harbor? Like all of these questions we've been asking for so long. And now the show is also teasing those things out. So I'm hoping that we will at least get some sort of answer because those questions were so prominent in this episode.
Yeah. Like if they're teeing it up, they've got to answer it somehow, right?
You would hope, but it's also Severance, so
Yeah.
you never know.
You never know. Oh man. Well, there is like a sense of camaraderie that I think it cultivates in us with the innies because they're trying to figure it out and they don't know, and we are trying to figure it out and we don't know, and we're being like led down this like rabbit hole of all these different new pieces of information that's being gathered, these strange occurrences, but like the same way that the innies are trying to piece it together, we as the viewers are also trying to piece it together and keep all of those contextual details somehow forming a theory in our mind that we can try and understand. But I think it speaks to the fact that like we as human beings desire for a sense of vision and direction and purpose, and to not know leaves us kind of unsatisfied. And the questionings that we have around like what is this all for, what are we building towards, what's our larger mission, is like universally kind of like a human desire, and we see that the innies have it and we as the viewers have it. And I think that that's a fascinating like sense of camaraderie we have with the innies.
Yeah, solidarity with the innies. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. What are some other big moments that stood out to you? There's a lot of them in this episode.
There are a lot of them. So, I mean, we need to talk about this funeral, this bereavement kit that they go through, because that's quite something.
Oh, the mournful signage, the watermelon sculpture.
Just
I feel like there's like
what?
so much meta hidden meaning behind that thing. I just don't have the brain cells at the time of watching this to like fathom what that is. But there seems to be something significant there. Like it is so eerie in the way that it looks visually with all that red and then the white nose. Like there's just so much symbolism that feels like it's baked into that.
I have so many questions about this watermelon head business. Like, number one, how did we get here?
Hmm.
Why is this the choice of all the things? Number two, how is this created? Like, is there presumably there's some sort of like a machine that will, 3D sculpt this watermelon. But okay, why? And then also, why are they eating it?
Yes.
I don't understand. You're eating a piece of watermelon that was in the shape of your friend's head. And I just can't get past that. So every part of it is so weird and disturbing. It's also so great and so perfect for Severance because they have a weird obsession with melons at Lumen. And so like it's
Yeah.
weirdly fitting for them and at the same time so off-putting. So it just achieves all the objectives.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's a point where Dylan has Irving's watermelon ear on his plate that he's just taking bites out of, and it's fascinating to see which of them are like unfazed by it and which of them are like, this is not right, I thought it was particularly some great character definition moments with Mark like shutting down essentially and disengaging and wanting to leave early. In general, we've seen his character have a pattern of like suppressing like hard feelings. It's kind of, I think, like the reason that he even agreed to the severance procedure to begin with is just too painful to feel the feelings of his wife's passing. And so he kind of uses severance as an escape to be able to just escape into work. And I appreciate that you see the way that his like emotional processing isn't kicking in at all. He's just deflecting, he's shutting down, he's isolating himself. And you see the way that Helly R is saying, like, this is not okay. Like this, you can feel things. Like, come be with us and process that this is sad. And he can't do that. He's just like running away and like wanting to leave this early. And so I thought it's fascinating to see the way that Mark S is definitely like regressing in this episode in contrast to some of the emotional growth that he was having throughout literally up until this point until now, which understandable. Like he's had a lot of hard revelations, so I get it. I'm by no means judging the man, but he's definitely operating in some of his old patterns again.
And I think it's also interesting in the context of him starting the reintegration process. Like,
Mm,
and obviously we don't know how the severed process works because we don't understand how anything in Lumen works. But we have learned that things will bleed through. And so
mm.
I am curious. Again, we don't know how the reintegration process works either. So is some of this maybe a byproduct of reintegration on top of everything else that he has gone through? And I'm just I don't think that Mark would be this callous were he not also going through reintegration at the same time.
That's
I
good.
think that that's definitely affecting his behavior. We just don't know how much or like the extent to which reintegration is affecting his innie.
That's a really great point. That's a really great point, which is that like not only has he like received this like really traumatizing information that like the person that he thought like he was developing feelings for is not who she said he was, and like the mistrust that comes from that. But I don't think he's also, we haven't seen him process the whole like Gemma being alive, Miss Casey business in his outie self.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's also probably bleeding in here too. So you're right. Yeah, that reintegration aligning and coinciding with this behavior is probably significant. And the presence of the cough throughout the episode I thought was so great and so genius because like it's a constant reminder, like physically he is undergoing something big right now. And the little coughs he has both in his outie self and his innie self are such like visual and physical reminders of like what is happening inside of his brain that he's undergoing right now. And so if we ever forget, which because there's a million things happening, the presence of the reintegration process like looms so large over the events of this episode.
Mm-hmm. And that reminder that they are connected and that obviously they are separate, but they are connected with each other, and the things that happen to one does affect the other in some way. And I think that that's a really interesting piece to really highlight. And the show is so smart in the way that it reflects our themes in our world today. And so I'm really curious to see how they explore reintegration, because I feel like so much of Western culture is about separating yourself, and like you just have to like go and do your work, and that is your life, and then you go home and you do your home life, and those things are separate, where like that doesn't really like work. We are people, and like we should be like one whole human person, and that's something that I personally have been working on because I'm really good at compartmentalization. So I'm just curious how this reintegration might highlight some of those themes and some of the unhealthy behaviors that we have developed and have been taught to develop when it comes to our work selves versus the other parts of our lives.
That's a really great point, because I think one of the things that we were talking about in episode 2 or 3, it's the part where Mark begins the reintegration process. We were talking about how like, wow, this seems like way faster than we expected the show's plotline to develop. Like obviously there would be a point where that was definitely in play, but we didn't think the show would go there that quickly. But if the larger commentary that the show is looking to explore is how while we think we can keep our lives separate, we cannot, and showcasing the ways that those things do bleed, then yeah, let's do the integration, and then like let that totally showcase all of the unhealthy ways that we bring our personal lives into work and also our work lives into our personal as well, and that there's no such thing as severance. Like the concept of severance is literally impossible, essentially, would be a thesis of the show.
Mm-hmm. And I'm also just so fascinated that reintegration doesn't seem to be an event, but a process. And I find that fascinating, because I definitely thought it was going to be like a switch that you flip and then boom, you're reintegrated. And it's not that way. And so I think that's also really smart to make it a process, because again, it speaks to these larger themes of like, what does it look like to be like a wholly integrated human person, rather than trying to split yourself into all of these little boxes. That's not something that we just do overnight. Like we can't just like flip a switch and we go about life differently, but it's a process. And so I'm curious to see how much they're going to like stretch this metaphor, and how relevant it's going to end up being for our lives as he goes through this process.
Yeah, that's a really great point, actually. I hadn't thought about the way that works, because I was surprised to see how there were conversations between him and the woman who's giving him the surgery, and they were talking about like, we need to continue with our sessions, like we've got to do more sessions. And I was like, I thought it was like one surgery and you're done, because we never saw what the process was for Petey. We just see the effects of like Petey underwent the surgery or the process, and we saw the after effects of him seemingly like near the point of full reintegration, even though it wasn't even perfect for him either. But the meta commentary around like, when we've created these compartmentalizations in our minds, they're not easy to undo. Like those patterns and how we think can't easily be undone with the flip of switch either. And so the way that does track with how that potentially works in real life is quite interesting. And I hadn't thought too deeply about that. That's a great point.
Gosh, way to go, Severance.
Yeah.
It's so good. Like there's just so much meaning in every little thing. I'm constantly impressed.
Yeah. Everything is so intentionally designed, and we're just feasting on it as we move from scene to scene. Okay, one of the other things that I was surprised by, but so pleasantly surprised by, is the moment where Milchek brings up the paintings with Natalie. And we, in general, see Milchek just in his sphere of control and influence as the department manager, and he's always got a smile on his face. He's always in control. He's always got this like confidence about him and bravado about him. And in the same way that we saw this flash of vulnerability and this rawness in him when he received the paintings, we see that same thing again, where he takes off that facade and really kind of like bears his soul with Natalie. And while she doesn't respond to him like with words, I think you described this once, that she's speaking like paragraphs with her eyes, and there's a sense of like knowing and understanding that she communicates to him. But just the way that we see this like a more emotional and vulnerable and softer side of Milchek, and him expressing the like deep discomfort and frustration with receiving those paintings, and just looking for connection, looking for someone to say like, yeah, me too. I felt that too. Felt so significant. So it was a fabulous moment from the episode where we get to see him receiving the paintings. And I didn't think that the show would revisit again, but clearly it has. And I was so happy to see that they're continuing to pull that thread and showcasing the experiences of people that are from underrepresented people groups that are working in these corporate organizations that feel really unseen and feel like even the attempts to make space for them are so misguided. And the emotional effects of that, I feel like, are really poignant in this episode and brought to life in that scene.
Yeah, that's such a great scene. And I love how they did it. And again, Tramel Tillman gives a fantastic performance. And then Sydney Cole Alexander as Natalie also just matches it perfectly. And I love that he's having this really like vulnerable emotional moment and is doing it while saying all of the corporate things. And I loved that juxtaposition, because you can tell from like his emotion and his delivery and his eyes that there's so much behind this, and he needs to say some things, but it's not safe. And he is just tossing it out there to see what the response is going to be. And I love that, because like if you've ever worked at an unhealthy location and you're trying to discover if somebody else sees all the messed up things that you see, you kind of go about it in this way. Like you're still saying all the corporate things and you're saying it in a certain way, but there's some subtext and some meaning there. And I love how they were able to do all of that in this really quick scene. They were able to communicate so much. And I don't know that the show is going to do this, but I really want to see an episode where Milchek and Natalie just like let their hair down and just go get a beer together outside of Lumen and just like spill all the tea. That is what I want. I'm not going to get it, but that is what my heart desires.
I would love that too. Can we get like the like spin-off like vlog sesh with the two of them just like hanging around town and after work just being like, can we just bitch about this together? Like, can we just real talk for a hot sec? Because also anyone that's worked in corporate environments that have been lucky enough to find those people that like you can just be like, okay, can we just like fully be honest for a hot sec? And it's often over beers and wings and stuff at 4:30 after work, where you're like, that was crazy, right? It wasn't just me. So I would love to see two of them be able to do that. That would be great. They need it. My gosh, they are being like squeezed by this company.
Yes. Well, and like to have these like two Black workers who are both in the middle of it all, you know, like Natalie is the voice for the board, but she doesn't have any power. And Milchek is over this severed team and is trying to do the best that he can, but he also doesn't have any real power. And so I think that that's also so interesting to see these two Black middle managers just stuck in it and not really sure what to do, and they don't really have any like good recourse, and they also can't be honest, and they are just stuck. And I'm so interested to see what the show does with that.
Yeah. And I just love that the show is spending so much time to have that be one of the key storylines that we get to follow. You know, we get a whole scene in this, a whole chunk of this episode dedicated to Milchek's performance review. And so I love that Milchek is not just a side character in the show now, but feels like such a central part of the key players on our game board as we're seeing everything unfold. Because I think in season 1, he was a little bit more on the wings of the stage a little bit. You know, Corbell was obviously the central figure, and he was kind of the supporting role for her. And he would just make such a big splash on the screen whenever he's on screen, but very much a little bit more of a side character. And I just love that he's fully in frame right now, and we're getting so much time with him. I thought that performance review sequence was so interesting as well. Let's talk a little bit about that.
He uses too many big words, and the paper clips were in the wrong direction.
I love the paperclip bit. That was great. It was so good.
It was just perfect. But I love the intentionality to have the performance review right after the Ortbo fiasco that happened in the previous episode, and that it's just perfectly timed because obviously he is stressed from the Ortbo and everything that went wrong and trying to get the numbers up and hold everything together and all of the things. And then he has to go straight from that into the performance review. And it's the worst possible time. And you just see, I don't know how Tramel Tillman does this, but he is just doing so much in those scenes when he's sitting across the table from Drummond and taking all of this information in. It's just fantastic performances, brilliant timing in the writing of the overall season. I loved it.
Yeah. And what I think is also really interesting about the performance review is that Drummond clearly is articulating, like, you have not done a great job. And I think they specifically use the word kindness reforms, which is so fascinating. I thought about that for so long after the episode, because everything that Milchek was doing was trying to make space and create an environment where Mark primarily is able to thrive, and he was trying to look for a new team for Mark to thrive in as well. But those are perceived by the organization as kindness reforms, and essentially Drummond's message was, don't be doing that. You know what I mean? Like, there's no place for that. Like, look at what it is ensued as a result of that. So, like, get you and your kindness out of there. And Milchek's conclusion is, well, I think he says, I'm tightening the leash now. And so just the way that, like, the well-intentioned desires that he have, and Milchek's not like altruistic, of course, like, it's for his gain, but like, he was trying to put the human first and help Mark feel like there's a place for him to thrive so that he can finish his Cold Harbor thing, which he knows is important to the women. But they're perceived, the way that it's labeled as kindness reforms, and then basically like ineffective kindness reforms, was a whole fascinating set of thoughts. The way that, like, those efforts were like unnoticed and were not valuable to the company, and so therefore they get stamped out immediately.
Yeah, and I think another kind of jarring piece of all of this is, obviously we've spent a good amount of time with Milchek, and we know, he's friendly, he's often smiling. There's something like menacing in that smile, but he's still smiley and friendly and at least outwardly a nice guy. And then we see that final scene with him and Mark after he says that he's tightening the leash, and Milchick gets in Mark's face and is in that tiny environment, blocking his path out. And I think, I could be wrong, but I think this is the first time that we've heard Milchick swear in this show.
Oh, yeah.
I could be wrong, but like when he just is talking to Mark so crassly and harshly, like it really took me aback. I was like, wait, no, this
What
isn't
happened to
the Milchick
Defiant
that we've come to know and love. Like,
Yeah. We want to
so it
see you
was just
dance to Defiant Jazz.
yes, we do want to
Where's
see
that
that.
guy?
So
Yeah.
I thought that was just so smart to give us that little ending bit. Like
Mm.
Milchick saying that he's going to tighten the leash isn't just something that he said and he's going to keep doing things the way that he wants to, but he is actually going to start acting very differently. And the severed workers are on notice that friendly Milchick is gone. And y'all better get ready for whatever we're about to see in the next few episodes.
Yeah.
Terrifying.
Yeah.
I was so intimidated and like just like, oh, Milchick, I want to take you out of Lumen.
Well, it goes, the larger meta point of that is the way that like organizations out of like pressure and kind of dangling carrots in front of us or whatnot, or just because we, get our paycheck from them, like will use whatever they need to do to like get the employees to conform to their way of doing things, and at all costs of like the natural humanity or connection that we have with our workers or with our team, or our natural instincts to just like provide a better environment. Like it doesn't matter. And I think the like shift that happens after the performance race is significant because it's only after he gets that feedback and is kind of threatened by Drummond and the organization of like, you are not performing up to snuff, like change your behavior or like you're out. And the way that causes just such pressurized environments to act in ways that like might not be how you naturally would. Because we've seen Milchick operate in a way that feels consistent, or at least aligned closer to how like when he had the freedom to, this is how he would manage the team, And we're seeing that he's kind of forced to operate very differently as a result of his performance review.
Yep.
And timing wise, it's great because it's smack dab in the middle of the season. And so we're like kind of like buckling our seatbelts extra tight to be like, oh man, like this is a new Milchick 2.0 that is now entered the chat.
Yeah. Yeah. Get ready. Like, no more kindness reforms, no more dance parties. Like, it's just all business. You better get those scary numbers cleared.
Yeah. Yeah. Wild. Okay. Any other big things? Oh my gosh, we have to talk about Bert. We have to talk about Bert. I was so thrilled for you.
Bert shows up. I was
you've been
so
waiting.
Excited. Yeah. Oh my gosh, I've been waiting for so long. I was so pleased. I'm watching Irving in this telephone booth, and then he spots the car, and I was like, oh, that's Bert. Yes. I'm so ready. And then the camera comes in and it's Bert. I was so happy. I am here for this. Bert has reacquainted with Irv, just this time they are outside.
Yeah.
And we're going to have a dinner, which is going to be really awkward. And I am here for this. I want to see the Bert and Irving dinner. Let's freaking go.
Yeah. I think what's great is that there's a promise of more Bert for you too. So the desire you have will definitely be satisfied. I think we're definitely going to see some juicy moments that happen in episode 6. I thought what was also really interesting, consistent with our conversation earlier around how like your innie and your outie are similar in a lot of ways and fluid, and you can't really separate yourself, is just seeing how much outie Bert just immediately hit Irving with some wit and some like clever, sassy comments back. And just the way that like that part of his personality is consistent, both in his any version, which we got to see, who's incredibly witty and sharp. And that's very much true with his outie version as well. And so I thought that was neat too, to see like, oh my gosh, like he has so many of the traits that we got to see of his any self, because we haven't really seen a ton of outie Bert at all yet. This is probably our first time of really getting to have a whole conversation with him. And to see how much felt so consistent and resonant was really neat to see.
Mm-hmm. Ugh, I'm so excited. I'm ready.
Yeah.
I need more Bert in my life.
Yeah.
Come on, Severance season 2. Let's do it.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Okay, let's see if there's any other big thing. I mean, there's a ton of big things that happen.
There's so many other things.
Yeah. Irving leaving the note for Dylan behind the hang in there sign. That was an exciting reveal. Yeah. Dylan spilling the tea to Helly about Mark's wife. Also a big reveal.
And just shout out to Britt Lower for her performance in this episode. Like this whole season, she's been fantastic. And like last episode, amazing. This episode, amazing. Like I really hope that she wins some awards for this season, because she is killing it. Like, man, and just seeing the differences between Helena and Helly, and then watching Helly try and navigate all of these new things that she hasn't learned before. Like she hadn't met Miss Wong yet and has to deal with that, and then trying to get Mark to act like a human being, and I just all of those things, and Britt Lower just does such a fantastic job. So I loved it. She did great.
She did. I had a whole note here jotted down for the beginning of the episode too, because I feel like we've known that, but to see it back to back from like scene to scene so close to each other, of the difference between Helena and Helly's facial expressions, the look in her eye, the small micro movements of the way that she shows up in the world, I feel like we got to see that so clearly in how much Britt Lower is doing work to bring these two very different personalities to life, because we get to see Helena having a whole conversation at the beginning of the episode, and then the next scene is her going into the elevator and immediately becoming Helyar, and just they feel like such different people, and for her to bring that so clearly to life in all of those small ways was genius. I mean, it's some really great acting work. She definitely needs to win some things. It's hard to do.
Yeah. And you're right. They are such distinct characters. They feel like two different people. For her to do both of them is just fantastic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, let's give out some TVNS awards, shall we? So the first category is for Employee of the Week. What is your choice for this one?
I want to give it to Dylan for his eulogy that he gets.
Yeah, I love it. He was kind of an asshole, but like, I miss that dude so much. He meant so much to me.
It's so good.
It's great.
It's so Dylan and so fitting also for his and Irving's relationship.
Yeah. My choice for this is a short scene, but I'm so fascinated by her because she's so great. But it's Devin speaking truth to Rickon and telling him not to sell out on his writing. I just thought like that was such a notable moment, and I feel like there's a whole Rickon dimension of this whole show that is like probably going to be explored a little bit more in the second half of the season, but there's just so much like meta meaning of that as well, of like the way that Rickon's so eager to like make all of these claims and write all of these words that is not resonant with what he feels. And I love that she just calls him out so fast on it, like, hey, let's think about this, okay?
Oh, I loved that scene, and what the like cherry on top of it for me is she has said her piece. She's called out his crazy propaganda. She gets up and starts to leave, and Rickon wants to continue the conversation, and she just says, "No, thank you," and just continues walking into the other room. And I loved that. I was like, yes, girl, you do not need to continue this conversation. You are done, and you have made that clear, and you can walk away. It was so perfect.
I love her character so much. I think everyone needs a Devin in their life, really. It's the moral of the story. Okay, the next category is move the needle moment. What is your choice?
Mine is Milchick's performance review.
Yeah, yeah. His I'm tightening the leash moment.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's big. That was big.
Yeah.
My choice for move the needle moment is the Bert G reveal. I think that there's just
Yes.
so much that's teeing up, and clearly Irving knows a lot. And now that he's connecting with other people, their opportunity for them to uncover some stuff has just now increased significantly. So anytime any of these people are talking to each other, I'm like, oh man, we could be onto something. So I think there's something there.
Yep. Not just great Bert moments, but important things for the plot.
Yeah. Yeah. So true. Okay, next category is achievement in corporatees. What is your choice?
Okay, I want to give this to Milchick when he pulls the severed workers into the office. He explains everything to them. They are not receiving it, and he ends the conversation with, "This went well." It's just like, wow, that is a thing that happens sometimes where you
So
have a
funny.
conversation. It didn't go well, and the higher up will still just rewrite the conversation to say, "This went well."
That is actually also my choice as well.
Yes.
Well, he also says right before that, it will take time to absorb all that has occurred. This went
Yeah.
well. That's so good.
Oh,
It's so
it's
funny
so
because I have
good.
a friend that was just telling me about a conversation she had with her manager where this exact thing happened. Like, basically, there was a big change, a big org change, and she was kind of like clearly visually showcasing like, oh my gosh, this is like kind of overwhelming and I need some time to process this. And she said like, I will need some time to like really think about this a little bit more. And apparently they like sat there for a hot moment and like a couple seconds went by and then her manager said, okay, so like you're good now? We're good? She was like, no. So the way that art imitates life is really, really coming through. They nailed that moment. That was great. He says it with a little smile too, as he's getting
Yeah.
up out of his chair and like being like, no, this conversation is over because I said it's over. It's great.
Yes.
So good.
And now let me escort you back to your workstation.
Yes. Yeah. Okay, looking ahead, what are you excited to see?
Oh gosh, so many things that we already talked about.
Yeah.
But one thing that we haven't talked about is that there was a distinct lack of harmony in this episode.
That was my biggest thing.
And excellent. We need, just like we needed more Bert, and we're getting more Bert, we need more harmony in this show. And just to see what kind of, right? Like, she is such a interesting character and can bring so much chaos to this already chaotic situation that we're in. Like, we need harmony to just come in and just blow some stuff up. And that is what I want. I want Agent of Chaos harmony.
Yep. Yeah, she is notably not in this episode at all. And it's like when you're babysitting, you're like, when you don't see the kids anymore, you're like, oh, this can't be good. You know, they're up to something. They're like, head is in the toilet. They've eaten toilet paper. Something's going down. So I think that she is likely going to invade in the next 5 episodes, and I can't wait. We're excited for it. I'm still intrigued by Miss Wong. They might not answer it this season, but that is such a fascinating question to see what they will or won't do with Miss Wong. And then I forgot about Rickon and Devin, to be honest, and that whole side of Mark as this Audi family. So the fact that there's a whole scene dedicated to them and their conversation feels significant, and like the show is definitely teeing up and planting seeds for answering whatever new questions and plot line is getting activated from that, because of all this time that they could spend showcasing scenes in this episode, why that one? So I think there's something there too, and I'm intrigued to see what they do with that. All right.
Yeah. Yeah, that was such a prominent moment too, and especially because it's like he's clearly writing some sort of propaganda, and I think that that's really, really interesting and curious to see where that's going to go.
Yeah. Yeah. And all the meta commentary along the way that like ideology is formed within companies, all of that stuff. It's going to be really fun to see. Well, this is our review and discussion of episode 5. You can find it available to stream on Apple TV+. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of TV and Us. Our name sums it up. We're big fans of TV and the powerful ways we can connect with each other and the world around us. This podcast is about all of us and our shared stories, so everyone is welcome here, and we're so glad you spent time with us today as we continued our journey through Severance Season 2. You can subscribe to this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you tune to your favorite shows. Drop us a rating and review, letting us know your thoughts about episode 5. You can connect with us on Instagram, Threads, and Blue Sky at tvnspod, or email us at tvnspod@gmail.com. We will be back soon to continue our journey, our second half of this season, with episode 6 coming out real soon. So we hope you have an amazing week, and we'll talk again with you very soon.